Thogoto in Kikuyu, Kiambu County, is considered as the epitome of the long-living Presbyterian Church of East Africa that was founded between the 18th and 19th century after the missionaries from the Church of Scotland landed in this particular place, led by the likes of the late Dr. Arthur, Thomas G. Watson, and Dr. Clement Scott. In this but popular mission land of Thogoto lies the historic monument and building of the Church of the Torch that exists up to date and is considered as the heart of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa in the country. Built between 1928 and 1933, by the local residents from this area, led by the late missionary Dr. Arthur among other missionaries, the building still stands strong for decades. This historic church that has existed for nearly 100 years was built symbolically, with each of its structure from its design, selection of window panes, construction materials used, not forgetting its popular symbol of the fire torch, locally known as Kimuri, which has a hidden meaning that everyone would wish to know more about. It's due to this reason that I decided to get deeper into the roots of the Church of the Torch and to dig out its history. I embark on a 2-hour drive to the mission land of Thogoto in Kikuyu, Kiambu County. Along the road, I could feel the chill from the indigenous trees surrounding the locality, one of the many reasons as to why the missionaries settled on the choice of the place to initiate their missionary work. From the outside of this historic monument, you can tell that the architecture of the Church of the Torch has a touch of the African heritage, which the early missionaries, led by the late Dr. Arthur, with the help of the Scottish architect Bernard P. Gamer, not forgetting the local residents, who provided manpower labor for its construction, helped put it up. Since the year 1928, when the late Dr. Thomas Watson and Dr. Scott, when they found it necessary, together with other missionaries, to put in place this historic monument that till to date preserves the history of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, its heritage transferred from one generation to the other. When they landed in Kikuyu, the missionaries led by the late Dr. Thomas G. Watson and other missionaries like Dr. Clement Scott had several objectives for the people of Kikuyu and the country in general. Among the objectives, the key ones were education, eradicating health-related complications, and finally, the most important one was to spread the gospel of Christ. Professor Ngugi, an elite from these residents, helps me understand the journey of the missionaries to the mission land of Kikuyu.
The early missionaries, I think it was Scott, he managed to secure land from the Kikuyus, about 3,000 acres, and it's around those 3,000 acres that the Church of Scotland Mission established the first church at Kikuyu. Alongside spreading the gospel, they had 3 other objectives. Second one was education, because through education people could read the Bible for themselves. Thirdly, health, because the time they came, there were epidemics, one epidemic after another, and therefore health was another focus. And finally, the early church realized to be sustainable, they have to embark on economic activities. At that time, they talked about industrialization.
With the motive of spreading the gospel, Dr. Adha oversaw the construction of the 800-seater chapel in 1928, and the church was named Church of the Torch, which meant bringing light to the dark continent. In 1928, Dr. Adha mobilized residents that they had converted to Christianity from the locality, encouraging them to come together and build this church with the driving power of kujitegemea, meaning that they wouldn't rely much on the help from the Church of Scotland to put in place the Church of the Torch. Elder Kenneth Igitau, an 84-year-old long-time congregant of the PCEA Church of the Torch, who have served this church for more than 70 years now, since its construction, helps me understand how the decision of putting in place the Church of the Torch was like.
The followers, the worshippers, continued rising, and it did not only involve the local people here. You had people coming from their distance of even 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, coming to being the only place of worship. Then sometimes it would attract quite a big crowd of worshippers. That's why to begin with, they thought of going back to that thingy of the trees, but then it didn't work. They therefore decided to start this one, and Dr. Arthur led. He would of course liaise with technical people back in Scotland, and therefore the plan was agreed upon. Yes. And they were ready, and then they had also identified where to get stones and other materials.
But before the construction of the Church of the Torch, what was the spiritual journey like for the residents of this Kikuyu mission land? Was it the first decision to have a church in the region since the arrival of the missionaries? The answer is obviously no. Adjacent to the Church of the Torch lies the oldest church and possibly the first Presbyterian church of East Africa, the Watson Memorial Church. 120 years after serving in Kibwezi, the missionaries led by the late Dr. Thomas Watson, they found themselves in this place in Kikuyu just to put in place this Memorial Watson Church that was built in 1909. The year 1898, when Thomas G. Watson, the sole survivor of a party of about 10 East Africa Scottish missionaries, arrived and pitched a camp in Thogoto. He sought better climate and diminished disease menace after narrowly escaping death in Kibwezi Mission Station, where his less lucky comrades were decimated by tropical diseases like malaria and chickenpox. A year later, after the ongoing railway construction reached Kikuyu, he decided to go back to Mombasa and pick his fiancée, Minnie Watson. On returning to Kikuyu, unfortunately, Thomas G. Watson succumbed to pneumonia short to their first anniversary.
I had come in 1998. In 1899, he had a fiancée, a girlfriend in Scotland called Minnie. And therefore Minnie moved from Scotland, came to Mombasa. escorted by one of the African friends he had, made friends with, called Kinyanjui. Went to meet Mine in Mombasa and married there. So when he came back here in 1899, he was now a married person. He had a wife. You see, so they struggled a little. But he was unfortunate because he only lived for 2 years with his wife. He suffered pneumonia. Probably this place was too cold, and died. Okay? So Mine was left a widow without a what? Without a husband. But she did not give up.
Following the death of her husband, with whom they had lived for only 2 years, Mine decided to stay back in the country, helping the elderly and victims of tropical diseases like the smallpox. However, the death of Thomas Watson wasn't the end of the road for the spread of gospel and mission work in the area of Thogoto. In 1903, another missionary, Dr. Clement Scott, arrived from Malawi. On landing in Thogoto, the people from the area gave him a nickname, Watenga, which possibly described his character, since he used to tell the residents to move or shift a little bit so he could acquire more land.
He was called by people here Watenga. Watenga. This simply because he used to tell people, he told you to move a little bit, he would say soga, and tell tenga. Okay? So the people here knew him as Watenga. So, Watenga had come from Malawi. And he is the person who bought this land. Because the kind of money that it cost, there was a sufuria, 2 cows, and I think there was also a calf. That was all. That was the price of the 30 acres. Yeah, but that was the price then. When Watenga came, he bought these other the other Nindi land from government. Okay? Whatever settlement, agreement he had with government, and the total acreage of the mission area was now 3,000.
By 1907, before his death, Dr. Scott had already acquired a total of 3,000 acres of land on which the Kikuyu mission land sits on. This is the year that saw the baptism of the first African, Philip Karanja, by the ailing Dr. Scott on his deathbed, who used to be his cook.
This Malawi fellow had put up a bungalow at a place probably will be shown. If you say it will be shown, we call it Banguru ourselves, but it's bungalow. It's because it is on, it's up. It's like a granary. It's up, a big building. It is, we showed you where the Nini was and the Nini was being made. In 1907, that building had been put up. But Nanui was staying there, Watenga. But for some reason, he thought of going to home for a rest. That 1906 or thereabouts. And then he came back in 1907. But when he came back, he was also sick. And he never came out of that sickness because he could not recover. And he died there. And just before he died, he called one of the servants who were serving him as pitch, as a cook, called Karaja. As he was on his deathbed, called Karaja, cook, and afraid too, and baptized him. Yeah. It is thought probably that was the first baptism of an African by the Presbyterian Church.
The few Africans who had converted joined each other to worship under trees, a place adjacent to the Watson Memorial Chapel, now the current Reverend Musa Gitau Primary School. But the weather condition and the condition of worship wasn't favorable for the few Scottish missionaries, which now saw the construction of the Watson Memorial Chapel in 1909 in memory of the Watsons.
So you had a church in memory of Thomas Watson.
Yes.
Then you had a hut
For
Minnie.
Yeah.
Bibi Wagabe. Bibi Wangabe meaning?
That is Mama because it's a camp. You know, when they started, it was not a settlement of it. It was like a camp. Yeah.
After its construction in 1909, several natural activities took place in this church. In fact, it is in this Watson Memorial Church that the first President of the Republic of Kenya, the late Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, was baptized in 1914. The church is made of metal sheets that were imported from Scotland in the 20th century and is made of a dome shape with a tall pinnacle and a cross on it. From the inside, it has got a unique ceiling made of wood pieces and some rounded wooden buttons. This church has a unique set of windows that have symbolic drawings and writings on them to represent some of the names of Scottish missionaries. It's shocking that some of the tools and paraphernalia used in the laying down of this church exist to date. For instance, this wooden pulpit and this concrete baptism vase have been here for the last 100 years, which I'm told they were used by the early missionaries like Dr. Clement Scott. The Watson Memorial Church was in use till the late 1920s, and now the missionaries realized that there was a growing number of the converted Africans, like the likes of Reverend Musa Gitau, and the structure was getting smaller, and it could only hold up to 200 congregants. There was need to keep the river flowing. The gospel had to be spread. This time, by 1926 to 1928, with the plot and help of Dr. Arthur, the idea of the glamorous and prestigious Church of the Torch was born.